Hey there, folks. This is Dana Fredder from Caliber Magazine, and today I want to discuss what we can expect to see from the Liberal Party in terms of campaign strategy and policy around firearms over the next 5 weeks as we head towards a much awaited 45th federal election. Why I think the policy is going to be a little bit misleading, and why it's thus very important that gun owners and hunters and people who know gun owners and hunters are well educated on the subject. But before I get to that, I want to make something abundantly clear because YouTube statistics and simple deduction tells you that you don't gain viewers as a video goes on. So the most important part of this video is that everyone understands that without wanting to invoke any kind of hyperbole, this is going to be the most important election for gun owners in Canada in modern history. The prohibitions that have been put in place since 2020, the ramifications of Bill C-21, the limitations on the transferred importation of handguns have all been some of the most broad-reaching, farthest, most entrenched and rhetorically driven partisan policies that I have seen in 14 years of covering gun policy professionally in Canada. They are huge. They impact hundreds of thousands of Canadians, if not millions. They impact millions of individual pieces of property, and it will change the landscape of gun ownership in Canada. And I think, as I'll get to later in the video, I think potentially if the Liberals are allowed to win a majority, will bring the current system of gun ownership in Canada to an end. We will be facing an entirely different reality with regards to what you can own, how you can own it, I expect, if the Liberals are allowed to win a majority. And I say that both because of the impact of the policies impacting firearms that have been available for decades or since Canada was even a country, but also because the more recent headlines around the fact that Mark Carney has pledged to continue the Trudeau-era policies, such as they are around firearms. He did so during the French language Liberal leadership debate. But more recently, the Liberal Party also announced the recruitment of one of Canada's most outspoken and prominent anti-gun advocates or gun control lobbyists, depending on how you want to look at it, Nathalie Provost, who heads up an organization called PolySeSouvient, who has been integral to this government's programs since 2016. She was the co-chair of the Canadian Firearms Advisory Committee under Ralph Goodale when the 2020 prohibition was largely drafted. She did depart that. However, she has still been involved with the government, appeared at numerous press conferences alongside government, been supportive of many of the government's actions, and in fact has criticized the government for simply not going far enough nor fast enough with regards to gun controls and reforms. And she is likely going to become a member of the Liberal caucus as she's running in a Montreal riding that is very likely to go in her favor. So I think between those two factors that Mark Carney is committed to uphold the Trudeau-era reforms, as well as the recruitment of, again, one of the most prominent anti-gun voices in Canada to a potential caucus seat, it's safe for gun owners to say that all of the chips are on the table in this potential election, that if the Liberals win a minority, it is very likely that they will continue the programs that exist and potentially even expand them. If they win a majority, we will likely see the very fabric of gun ownership in Canada completely shift, potentially the existing form of gun ownership become extinct. I'll get to that later in the video because there is some evidence of that already. But before I get to that, I want to go back to the original discussion of the Liberal strategy, why it's going to be a bit misleading, and some of the key pieces of evidence around why I think it's going to be the way the Liberals put this issue forward to the public. But first, to return to the strategy itself, I think what they're going to do is that they're going to put forward the notion that they have not banned any hunting guns and that they will not ban any hunting guns. And for those that have followed this issue closely over the last 5 years, this will no doubt be a very familiar rhetoric because we've heard this from Justin Trudeau. We've heard this from pretty much every Minister of Public Safety since Ralph Goodale. We've heard it from the members of SECU when they were studying Bill C-21. We've heard it from pretty much everyone affiliated with the government that they respect hunters. They're not banning hunting guns. They're just cracking down on everything else. Which brings me to the political perspective on this, which is that the allegation that the Liberals are looking to put forward that they haven't banned hunting guns, the allegation that they have put forward historically, and we'll get to that with the evidence, is the invocation of a false dichotomy, because if they are allowed to put forward the notion to the public that they are not banning hunting guns, that they are also tacitly accepting the notion that there are such a thing as a hunting gun, which means that there must also then, by extension, be guns that are not hunting guns. So for those that have lost the plot on that logical riddle, that if the government comes out and says we haven't banned hunting guns, that they can turn around and ask Pierre Poilievre, since we haven't banned hunting guns, what are the guns that you want to legalize? Because they're not hunting guns by extension. Now, that's the political wedge issue at play, and that's why I think they're going to use this particular rhetoric. Also, too, in terms of why, it's the going to the three pieces of evidence that I mentioned earlier. The first and foremost of which is Bill C-21, specifically Amendment G-46 to Bill C-21. For those that have lost track, because this is going back a few years now, that bill did take a long time to get through Parliament. It was a 307-page long list of guns that the government wanted to add to Bill C-21 that would become prohibited. The list itself largely mimicked the list of guns banned in December of 2024 through OIC, with one notable inclusion to the G46 amendment, and that was the SKS. But what's important isn't the technical aspects of the SKS or that it was included then and it still wasn't included in December. What's really important is the rhetoric that surrounded the discussion of this amendment. When it was introduced by the Liberal government, the Liberals were adamant that they were not banning any hunting guns, that the amendments that they were introducing, be it G4 or G46, the Bill C-21 itself, did not ban any hunting rifles. They were being respectful of hunters and the guns that hunters use. They were simply banning sort of so-called assault-style firearms and guns too powerful to own and that sort of thing. The Conservative Party and gun owners pushed back on this rhetoric for days, stating that obviously if a gun is non-restricted, it can be used for hunting, and that the list included a variety of guns that numerous people do hunt with. None of that worked, and it gained absolutely no traction. Liberals did not concede any sort of credibility to it whatsoever. What did make the Liberals start to reconsider, however, was the announcement from Indigenous groups by way of open letter that the SKS specifically is used by a lot of remote subsistence Indigenous hunters because it is cheap, affordable, and the ammunition is plentiful, which in remote areas are three key attributes you're looking for, because if everything you have has to come in by plane, newsflash, 6.5 Creedmoor might not be the ammunition that you want to be buying. 7.62x39 works great on a lot of medium-sized game in the North American continent. The SKS rifle is an absolute workhorse of a gun, and when you could buy them for $200 to $300 each, they were a very affordable option for a lot of people in these areas, and that's what the Indigenous groups pointed out in these open letters. Now, within the gun community, it's basically accepted that the Liberals caved to the pressure that was applied by Indigenous groups. This was a hunting rifle. I would posit the notion that that isn't quite true and skips a step, that the Indigenous groups, by way of that open letter, introduced pressure that was then applied through the media, because in my job of making a magazine and covering gun stuff, I obviously watch a lot of media coverage of firearms. And what I noted wasn't that the letters were being republished ad nauseum and putting pressure on the Liberals, but rather the media saw those letters with credibility that the gun owners in the country, unfortunately, did not have, and accepted the notion that the Liberals were now banning hunting guns. Through the eyes of the Indigenous letters that were written, they could see and say, yeah, okay, they are indeed banning hunting guns. That forced the Liberals to confront the fact they were banning hunting guns, and it sort of made the entire rhetoric shift from these are amendments that aren't seeking to ban hunting guns to the Minister of Public Safety lied. There are literal headlines around that, various Liberal staffers, various Liberal MPs were lying when they said that they weren't going to ban any hunting guns because, look, based on what we've heard from these people with credibility to the media, they were indeed going to be banning hunting guns, and as a result, the Liberal Party withdrew the amendment. It wasn't defeated in committee. That's again crucial because it wasn't beaten down by pressure. It wasn't the NDP and Conservatives teaming up to vote it down. The Liberals voluntarily withdrew the amendment, I think because it did not serve their purposes of putting forward the notion that they were being respectful of hunters' rights, being respectful of hunters' guns, and not banning hunting rifles, referring back to that original strategy that I just said. The second piece of evidence is the other large and hugely impactful piece of policy the Liberals brought forward, which was the prohibition on the transfer of handguns. Now, as I said, any gun that's non-restricted in Canada can be used as a hunting rifle, but handguns in Canada are restricted. They have not been able to be used for hunting for decades at this point, meaning that the Liberals could once again put forward the rhetoric that they were not banning hunting rifles or hunting guns. These were guns that have not been used for hunting. So they have no purpose, therefore they can be banned. The third piece of evidence that ties it all together is the December 2024 ban, which unfortunately did prohibit a great number of the rifles that were included on that G46 list. But there are three specific guns that were on the list and simultaneously not on the list that I think further demonstrates the same logic at play during the G46 amendment discussion around hunting guns and the role of hunting guns within the Liberal Party's gun reform strategy. And those three guns would be the Winchester SXAR, the FN FNAR, and if those two are unknown to you, what you likely will recognize, the Browning BAR. The Winchester SXAR, the FNAR, and the Browning BAR are the same gun. The FNAR and the SXAR are now prohibited. They were prohibited in December of 2024. The Browning BAR is still a non-restricted rifle. And when I say they are the same gun, I don't mean that they are similar. I don't mean that they are like an AR-15 from Daniel Defense and HK or anything like that. They are the same gun. FN owns Browning and Winchester. When in the early 2000s, late 1990s, when the Browning BAR was getting a little bit long in the tooth, they created two additional models of the rifle, basically looking to brand engineer and leverage the brands Winchester and FN to create additional revenue off of the Portugal Browning BAR production line by creating an FNAR, which was marketed as a law enforcement rifle and European competition rifle for markets that didn't want to be seen as militarized by buying AR-10s for their police officers, because this is a 308, and competition guns in markets where AR-15s were not legal. And the Winchester SXAR was largely supposed to be sort of the cheaper version of the Browning BAR, which is broadly recognized as a luxury hunting gun of some sort because it's a well-finished and relatively expensive gun. So it was a synthetic stocked, hydro-dipped camo version of the Browning BAR. And when I say version, I mean version. They all came out of the same factory. I'll throw a picture up here. You can see they are the same rifle. The only difference is the finish and the branding on the side of the gun. But two of them are now prohibited and one isn't. I would allege that the reason that the Browning BAR remains non-restricted is because although the Browning BAR match, specifically the FNAR and the Winchester SXAR, are the exact same gun, it is very difficult for the government to separate a single model of Browning BAR in the match model and prohibit that gun without it impacting the larger parent entry on the firearms reference table of the Browning BAR, because effectively, this is where that variant term kind of comes and bites the government in the you-know-what and turns around on them, is that the Browning BAR match is, by most people's definition, likely considered a variant of the Browning BAR. However, the FNAR and the Winchester SXAR, by virtue of being under two different brands with distinct model designations, does not need to impact the Browning BAR record. And since the Browning BAR is very much recognized by Canadians as a hunting rifle, it has been carved out and exempted from the prohibitions impacting its two exact siblings. And I think that with those three pieces of evidence, you can kind of get a very comprehensive notion that what the Liberals have been trying to do for the past 5 years is prohibit everything that cannot be put forward to the public on a perception basis as hunting rifles. And I know that that term will frustrate a lot of gun owners because, like I said, if it's a non-restricted rifle, you can use it for hunting. There are lots of people that hunted with M14s. There were lots of people that hunted with Tavors. There were lots of people that hunted with WK-180s. There were lots of people that hunted with the non-restricted AR-type rifles that we had years previously. I'm not going to dispute that fact whatsoever. But this is all about public perception. And if the public perceives that the government is banning hunting rifles, it would completely torpedo the notion that they can put forward, which is that we have not banned any hunting rifles. And it would completely torpedo the false dichotomy they're trying to set up, wherein they can ask, if we haven't banned any hunting rifles, what exactly are the guns that Pierre Poilievre wants to legalize used for? Which is, I think, where we're going to go in the next few weeks, and why I think it's very important that gun owners be educated on this issue, because, like I said, this is a bit of a misleading argument, given we've seen so many rifles that people use for hunting be prohibited by this government under the guise of public perception. They're basically using people's ignorance of firearms and how they're used and the existing regime around their control in their favor and to our detriment, unfortunately. So If you have enjoyed the video, obviously send it around to as many people as you like, because that's sort of where it ends. The only thing that I will add is that with that most recent ban, like I said, how this could inform what the Liberal government may do. On that March 7th ban of another 179 firearms that we saw just a few weeks ago, there was a more important, in my opinion, notation on there that they were looking at reforming the classification system entirely, instead of simply reclassifying firearms within the existing system, that they were looking at reforming it. And to that end, I would say that where things get very scary, to be blunt, for hunting or for gun owners in this country, is that if the government pivots their entire argument around the notion of hunting rifles being something that the Canadian population is willing to accept and all other guns not being something that Canadians accept, that we may see a shift in gun ownership methodology or the licensing system or whatever mechanism the government would use to do so, from getting a license to owning guns to getting a hunting license and then being allowed to own a prescribed firearm. And by that I mean you could get a license to hunt deer, and then you would be able to buy one of the rifles that the government has approved for hunting deer in this country. Maybe it would be like caliber, where they'd say you can own a 308 or a 303. Maybe they'd say if you got a moose license, it could be 300 Win Mag. I don't know exactly how they would work it, but this is a system in place in a lot of European countries. Mark Carney has obviously referred to Canada as the most European North American country. Nathalie Provost has repeatedly stated that effectively, I mean, not repeatedly, but she has gone on the record and said the exact words of legal gun. The problem with guns is not criminal use of guns. It is with legal gun owners with issues. And then she went on to explain how she was shot by a legal gun owner with issues as evidence of the fact that widespread gun ownership shouldn't be a thing that is permitted within her worldview, which she is obviously entitled to, but obviously we are also welcome to oppose. So I think we would see that actually be something that might be on the table if they want a Liberal majority, where it would be shifting to a hunting-centric model of gun ownership, such as is employed in a lot of European countries. And like I said, that would obviously mean the extinction of our current form of gun ownership, the end of competition, broadly speaking, with firearms. And it would be a real shame to see that happen. So it's, like I said, the most important election for gun owners. Like I also said, please share this stuff, tell people about this, because the Liberals are counting on ignorance. They are counting on hunters hearing that messaging and going, it's not going to impact me. But there are a lot of hunters who, over the passage of the last 5 years, have seen their guns impacted. We've seen the articles, we've heard the stories. We all know someone who said in 2020, this doesn't impact me. But then in December of 2024 said, well, I bought one of the guns they told me to because they said, go find an alternative to the guns that are prohibited. And I did. And then they banned that gun too. We need to be telling those stories, and we need to be educating the people who have not experienced that, because we are facing something that may impact them. And even if it doesn't, it will impact their kids and future generations of gun ownership. It will change the way guns are used, the freedoms that we have to have them in Canada, the freedoms to use them. So it's hugely important that we try and combat the misinformation that we're likely to see, because it is campaign season and nothing says an election campaign like misinformation. So share this video around, tell your friends, make sure everyone knows this is a very important issue, that it's going to become binary and black and white when it comes down to it. I hope everyone's doing well. Don't stay too glued to the old doom scrolling. I know the polls are very scary, but it's a long election campaign. A lot of things can happen. The big important thing is that as gun owners, we do our parts. Like I said, get involved. Hunter S. Thompson said, in a democracy, you've got to be a player. This is our time to step on the field and do that. So if you don't want to get involved with the political party, make a resolution that every day you will message a friend and tell them about this stuff. When this comes up in the news, as I'm sure it will, go the extra mile, share the news around, make sure people understand that it is not entirely true. They haven't not banned hunting guns. They banned plenty of hunting guns. There's lots of evidence to be used in that argument. But definitely just get involved and do what you can do as best you can to combat this, because there are 2.4 million of us gun owners in this country. We can have a voice in this election. We need to have a voice in this election. So please do your part. As I always do at the end of the videos, though, look after yourselves. Don't go doom scrolling for 24 hours a day. Go touch grass, play with your kids, look after your own mental health. It's hugely important. Look after yourselves. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did like it, like, comment, subscribe. As the YouTubers always say, I will be down in the comments for the next few days answering questions and comments and that sort of stuff. And I will see you again in the next one. I'm going to be doing a few more videos probably as the election continues and we hear more news about this stuff, trying to keep everyone updated. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.